Ahoy! Michael here to finally cover one of the zaniest and most beloved animes to ever sail the Great Blue. That's right, One Piece. The story of Luffy D Monkey's quest to become king of the pirates is filled with unforgettable characters, incredible adventures, and a literal boatload of laughs. But is there something deeper happening beneath the chaotic waves? Specifically, can One Piece actually tell us something about organized society? Or even how to rebel against a society that sucks? We think so, and we'll explain in this Wisecrack Edition on One Piece, how to live outside the law. And spoilers ahead for about a fifth of the total run of One Piece, but if you like this, let us know and we can make another video in the future. For the uninitiated, One Piece is a show about Luffy, an aspiring pirate king who rounds up a crew of misfits to sail the sea in pursuit of the titular One Piece treasure. These aren't your run-of-the-mill kooks either. Luffy is a rubber man, meaning he can stretch his body Mr. Fantastic style, a power he indulges to adorable effect at every opportunity. His pal Zoro is a pirate hunter turned pirate who wields not one, not two, but 3 swords. One is for his mouth, obviously. Nami reads relatively normal, but she's still a sneaky thief and kick-ass navigator. The chef, Sanji, is a horned-up nicotine fiend who loves fine dining and kicking ass. Their engineer, Usopp, is a pathological liar who has a tough time distinguishing his fantasies from reality. Oh, and their doctor is a magical deer who can talk. When we say misfits, we mean it.
切れた。あんたたち何者のつもりでチョッパーを勧誘してたの？
七段変形、面白トナカイ。非常食。
That said, maybe a magical deer doctor wouldn't be on my case about my cholesterol levels so much. And these aren't the only weirdos in this world. In fact, almost every single character is bizarre, and that's largely the point. The farther from the mainland you go, the stranger the adventures become. It's almost like when you're out at sea, the rules of land or the logic of terrain no longer apply. So why does this matter? We can answer with the help of bald icon, leather aficionado, and French philosopher Michel Foucault. Let's start with what Foucault thought about terrain and roads. In his essay of Other Spaces, Foucault explained that different spaces in modern society function as a network. That is, they exist in relation to one another. He writes that one could describe via the cluster of relations that allows them to be defined the sites of temporary relaxation, cafes, cinemas, beaches. Likewise, one could describe via its network of relations the closed or semi-closed sites of rest, the house, the bedroom, the bed, etc. This is to say that there are places where certain rules apply. You don't run around screaming in a movie theater, and you aren't getting into bed to do a jazzercise routine. These places have defined functions, and as such have defined rules. We see plenty of the expectations surrounding various kinds of land-based spaces in One Piece, like when Luffy is caught breaking the law, which is sort of his favorite hobby, or when the crew is forced to confront the reality of farming, among other landlocked jobs, and the costs that come with them. However, Foucault points out that some spaces are free from these sorts of rules. These he calls heterotopia. And unlike what you might be thinking, heterotopias don't refer to a Buffalo Wild Wings next to a Gap outlet. Heterotopias are typically enclosed spaces, worlds within worlds, if you will. Fittingly, for our purposes, he identifies the boat as a heterotopia par excellence, describing the boat as a floating piece of space, a place without a place, that exists by itself, that is closed in on itself and at the same time is given over to the infinity of the sea. When it comes to modern transportation, the way we move has become largely codified. We drive cars on government-paved roads at government-enforced speed limits and take our shoes off for the privilege of flying across the country in a rattling tin can with wings. But when you traverse the sea, you're a lot more free and unrestricted. Sure, there are laws, but as anyone who saw Captain Phillips knows, it's a lot easier to break them. A heterotopia's specific function and population creates a unique type of freedom for its inhabitants. As scholar Ibrahim Marazka explains, a heterotopia enables human agency because it allows the freedom to create other rationalities and to follow them. Think of how on the Going Merry, the crew can act like absolute maniacs.
こんな時に宴会やんないなんて嘘だぜびっくりしたあんたも大変な奴らの仲間になったもんよね
Or how they can derail their quest at any time to say, help reinstall a missing monarch. Or bring a dragon colony back to life. As Luffy explains, he doesn't want to be Pirate King because he wants people to bow down to him. He simply wants to be free.
支配なんかしねえよ。この海で一番自由なやつが海賊王だ。
And life on the Going Merry enables that pure state of freedom. Heck, Luffy is completely clueless about and ambivalent towards money.
あ、金なら俺持ってねえぞ。
And his life, like his corporeal form, is pretty malleable. Throughout the crew's adventures, they play a wide variety of roles and are able to go wherever they choose. Sometimes they're saviors. Sometimes they're criminals. Sometimes they're just trying to enjoy a dinner uninterrupted by pirate fights. And it's not just that they move around a lot and make zany friends. They also use this freedom to fight against oppressive powers that might seek to restrict them. The crew often finds itself in places run by corrupt governments, or taken over by the Marines, or even usurped by evil pirates who, not coincidentally, have often given up their seafaring gig for a life on land. Fittingly, Foucault wrote that in civilizations without boats, dreams dry up. Espionage replaces adventure, and the police the pirates. We see this literalized repeatedly in One Piece, which takes us to places where pirates have given up the freedom of heterotopias to impose a very not fun rule of law. Obviously, this isn't the only story where a crew of pirates represent radical freedom, but the cool thing about One Piece is how explicit it is. We see a world government that is corrupt and uses its power to oppress people and inflict harm on weaker communities. We see our heroes frequently matched up against these evil systems. And according to scholar Julian Reed, the freedom afforded to nomadic groups, like pirates, puts them in the best possible position to take on powerful enemies. Wisecrack favorites Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari drew an important distinction between two visions of war. There's war as a state apparatus that uses violence to control its people, intimidate enemies, or be straight up jerks. And then there's the war machine, i.e., the eternal human impulse to struggle, sometimes violently, for the sake of differentiation. That is, a struggle in which people want to affirm themselves on their own terms rather than in relation to some opposing force. It's basically the opposite of what philosophers call dialectical thought, which always defines two opposites precisely in their opposition to one another, i.e., hot and cold, up and down, Taco Bell and Pepto-Bismol. As Reed explains, Deleuze thought that when we define war as an instrument of only the state apparatus, we create limitations, because war exists both inside and outside the domain of political sovereignty. Basically, Deleuze thinks you don't need to be a nation to wage a war. In fact, he uses evidence from ethnography to argue that nomadic tribes often waged war not to protect a state, but to stop a centralized state from forming in the first place. In this view, war has been and still can be a valuable form of resistance against state control. And we recently did a video arguing that the human impulse for war isn't really that natural, so be sure and check that out for a different perspective. Because of this, Deleuze sees the war machine as inherently antagonistic to the state apparatus, though the state may try its darndest to appropriate it. Deleuze ultimately believed that the war machine could be transformative and offer alternatives to the state, which he thought limited possibilities. Take the opposing ways that states and nomads navigate space. States organize it, determine ownership of it, and place other arbitrary restrictions on it, which is why I'm no longer welcome at Yosemite National Park. It's a long story. In contrast, nomads live freely without territorializing the spaces they inhabit. States might define nomads in relation to themselves, but nomads driving the war machine are striving for a pure affirmation that differentiates them from the state. We see the nomadic war machine throughout One Piece. Pretty much every narrative arc is resolved with a big fight, with the stakes almost always being the freedom of a character, or an entire community, or sometimes just a cute dragon, like the time Luffy and co take on Arlong, or fight to liberate Alabasta. And this is a key way in which the anarchic nature of the Going Merry's crew can teach us about the world. They are violent, but their violence maintains a code, and it's nomadic in that it's often directed against the state. They don't belong to a military structure that serves the needs and demands of the sovereign. What's more, remember how our friends live in a heterotopia? That gives them the ability to see outside the rules and norms of organized society. As a result, they aren't confined to a single worldview. You could call them psychic nomads. That doesn't mean they're wanderers with telekinesis. Psychic nomadism simply means that you pick and choose from a great big buffet of worldviews, religious, political, ethical, while rejecting aspects of those views that you don't find as tasty. For example, Luffy embraces the violence and chaos of the pirate worldview, but rejects the cruelty and selfishness. And Chopper views the world through the lens of magic, being a talking deer and all, while still abiding by the science of medicine. The result can be, as you might guess, somewhat chaotic. Sometimes the crew has to save a kingdom and install a rightful ruler. Sometimes they have to get rid of rulers altogether. It all depends on the scenario and on who happens to be on board the ship. Rather than fighting one political ideology with another, they're fighting against ideology altogether and defending some type of formless freedom or self-actualization. They don't want to exist in relation to the state, they just want to exist.
関係ねえんだぞ。王様だろうと神様だろうと、誰が偉くたって偉くなくたって関係ねえんだ。俺は海賊だからな。
The key consistency, though, is that the crew resist the monopoly over violence granted to those in power, in large part thanks to their relative egalitarianism. Now, of course, we're not saying that you should buy a boat and sail around the Florida Panhandle to beat up the Coast Guard. But if that's your bag, who are we to stop you? But you can still take a valuable lesson from One Piece. Modern social movements are often under a lot of pressure to strive for ideological consistency when they resist state power. In contrast, the One Piece crew doesn't stake a consistent position in their resistance. The way they fight back doesn't always have to look the same or uphold the same values. Rather, they use their flexibility and their position as residents of a heterotopia to change themselves to fit the crisis at hand. This mutability as a form of resistance is very literally displayed in Luffy, who can stretch his body in all sorts of forms as he fights. The crew's mobility, both literally and ideologically, is its own form of power. And maybe more importantly for our swashbuckling homies, it's a form of positive freedom. That is, a freedom which is more about freedom for rather than a freedom from some type of oppression or control. In this way, One Piece shows us the value of movement and flexibility, and the unique power of the pirate and the nomad. These lifestyles that are able to adjust, change, and accommodate new circumstances aren't just excuses to wear cool hats and bling, but are in fact ways to more effectively think about ourselves as political and social actors. But what do you guys think? Does the crew show us the power of the nomadic war machine? Should we ditch land for the pure heterotopic freedom of a boat? Let us know in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support, and be sure to check out our revamped Patreon page for loads of exclusive new content. Stab that subscribe button like you're cutting a steak with your mouth knife, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later. Energy! Okay, sorry if that hurt your ears if you had headphones on.